All right, folks, we're live.
Hi, we're live. Are you ready for me to start?
Yes, go ahead. We're live.
Okay, thank you. So good evening, good afternoon, however you look at it. We're here tonight for a wonderful presentation and an opportunity to bring our community together. We're going to talk about the why of suicide and the how of hope. And my name is Robin Roberts. I work for your Mono County Behavioral Health Department. I've lived in Mono County for getting on to 14 years. The reason I'm here tonight is in part because I'm part of the county behavioral health system, but also because this is my community. I want to tell you that what we have to offer at Mono County Behavioral Health is pretty much anything that you might need. If you are a person who's struggling, if you are a person who's trying to figure out how to help somebody who's struggling, we're here to talk you through it and to help you out and try to figure out next steps, how to deal with it, etc. I want to acknowledge all the people that put the work in to make this happen. Not a small effort ever, and that we're doing it on Zoom in this new world that we're in. Just makes it all the harder, but also hopefully more accessible to people who might not be able to get somewhere in the county today. We are broadcasting this on Facebook Live through the Mono County Behavioral Health page. So again, we are at Facebook Live on the Mono County Behavioral Health page. So I've been asked to introduce this to you all, and I'm going to speak just for a minute about my community. Right before we ended up in a lockdown due to COVID, we had a variety of people who took their life by means of suicide. And a variety for us here in Mono County, meaning 6, and that's a lot. Any is too many, 6 is a lot for us. And at that time, we did some outreach to the community. We had about almost 100 of you show up in the Forest Service amphitheater, whatever that place is. And one of the things that we talked about that had great emphasis, or that had great meaning to me from you, the community, was how hard it is to reach out when you're struggling, and that we needed as a community to reach in. And so I've been thinking about that for the last year and some as we've managed the isolation and loneliness of the pandemic. And so what I want to say is, number one, the community here is amazing. The people that are here are incredible. There is so much heart amongst my community of people throughout Mono County, and I really, really appreciate you. I am certain, because I've been in this field for getting on 40 years now, that all of us, if not most, perhaps most of us, if not all of us, have at one time or another felt like we didn't want to be here, have felt like we couldn't get through it, whatever it was, for whatever reasons. And there are a variety of reasons that we might have decided to give it another day or another week or another year. And in most of those cases, it's because somebody reached in. Because really what this is about, in big order anyway, is loneliness and disconnection. So what I want for all of us to do today, and I don't know why I'm into pledges today, I'm kind of into the pledge today. I don't even really quite know what that means. Hopefully David could help us with that one. Is to make connection with somebody. That means send them a text and just say, I'm thinking about you. That means reach out, give them a phone call and just say, hey, I'm thinking about you. That means when you see somebody and you recognize them, even with their mask on, you say, wow, it's really good to see you out there. And then if it's somebody you know, reach out. If you're worried about somebody, reach out. How you reach out is you don't have to solve any problems for anyone. You just have to be there. Loneliness is a huge driver. It either moves us towards people or away. That's my belief about my work. And I want you to know that Mono County Behavioral Health is here to help with loneliness, to help you try to connect with people who might feel lonely, and mostly to continue to work on how we're going to reach in. So with that, I I was told to introduce you to Baldy, but I'm not doing that because the guy has a reputation for being one of the better parts of this community that we're in right now, to talk about health and healing, to talk about the depths of despair and how hope is possible. And also he has a sense of humor. So that's always a good sign. His name is David Bertley, and I introduce him now to you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. I am so excited to be here. And what I'm going to do here just initially is to pull up my PowerPoint just so we can get to, and I promise you that this is a fun PowerPoint. Are you all able to see the full screen there? Robin, Matt, are you able to see the full screen?
Sorry, yes.
Okay, good. So what we're going to do here is the initial part, we're going to do a quick poll because I kind of want to get an idea of where people are at. Then I'm going to tell my story, and this will be a non-interactive part. It'll take about 45 minutes, and then we will go into more of a teaching part in which I want to teach you ways to dovetail off what Robin said about this whole thing about connection, because I'll go right to the end. Like here's the takeaway, is that connection creates hope, and hope in fact saves lives. It's the only thing that will save lives. In fact, this will be the solution to this incredible problem that we're now facing. And ideally, at the end of this, you'll understand some of the whys of suicide, but more importantly, you're going to understand and be fully vested and fully equipped with the how of hope. So with that, I'm going to give it to Cassandra and or Matt, and see if you will please do the poll questions. And given the technological genius of Zoom, it's pretty easy. And so with that, I will turn it over to you, amazing souls.
David, the notes are showing on the presentation.
My notes are showing?
Yeah, it's the half screen.
Is it really? Okay. Bear with me here. Well, I'm going to stop my share. Thank you for telling me that. I'm going to share again. Matt, how about now?
Beautiful. It's perfect.
Thank you, brother. Okay, cool. Got that. All right. And you have the, there's the poll right there. Okay. And then Matt, the results will show up here momentarily, correct?
Correct. Once we end the polling, then
Okay.
we can do display results.
Okay. Thanks, sir. Matt, have they answered, you know? There we go. Okay, thank you, brother. So what is your biggest fear related to mental illness? 100% has said feeling misunderstood. So it didn't look, we had, maybe there might've been a problem with the poll quote, but I think feeling over, so biggest fear is feeling misunderstood. The biggest concern as it relates to the health of your neighbors is feeling overwhelmed by loss. And then one word to describe mental health is well-being. So there might have been a problem with the polling in the sense of people didn't participate, but that's okay. So I want to go ahead and start in about telling my story. It all begins on a particular day. And that day was August 31st, 2011. Now, I'm certain that you don't remember that that was a Wednesday. So for most people, if you look on the outside looking in, it was just a typical hump day, just one of those ordinary days, almost a throwaway day. But for me, this day, almost exactly 10 years ago, was anything but ordinary, because August 31st, 2011 was the day that I was going to kill myself. This was the day that the monster known as clinical depression had forcibly convinced me, after close to 40 years, that I was worthless and useless, that I was despicable, that I was ugly and grotesque and pitiful, that I was stupid, that I had become an embarrassment and burden to the people in my life. And most damning was, on that particular day, the monster, the evil, awful, sinister monster, had convinced me of the worst lie of all, was that everybody in my then life, my former wife, Deanna, my family, my friends, the monster convinced me on that terrible day that their lives would improve exponentially if I would just kill myself. And so at the time, Deanna and I were living on this beautiful little 2.5 acre parcel about 30 minutes east of Sacramento. And I remember waking up on that morning and I walked around the property, and I think back now, it was almost like I was taking snapshots with my mind, some images, some memories to take with me wherever I was going. And then I came back inside and I sat down at the computer and I typed out my suicide note. Dear Deanna, I have decided that the time has come for me to go. I am choosing to end my life so I can be free of the pain in my heart and soul, the betrayal of my mind, and the depth of self-hatred that I feel. I have become a burden I wish I never would, and a drag on those around me. I am a damaged shell of a boy, not yet close to the man I should be. Everyone will be much better off without me. I am so very sorry. I took the note off the printer, and without telling anybody where I was headed, I got in my red Dodge Dakota pickup truck and I made the 20-minute drive from my home in Penryn to the Forest Hill Bridge. Now, most people, of course, everybody knows the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, but not a lot of people know about the Forest Hill Bridge. Well, the Forest Hill Bridge stands 730 feet above the North Fork of the American River. It is 500 feet further off the ground than its more famous cousin, just 2 hours to the west. And the other point that may be the most essential that I'll make tonight is that this wasn't my first time to the bridge. I had been plagued by suicidal ideations since the time that I was 11 years old, for decades upon decades. And I had been to the bridge before. I had thought about this scenario before. I had planned it out just in case there was this day that might come. So much so that I knew exactly where I was going to park my vehicle. And so I pulled into that spot. I turned off the ignition, and then I placed my hands reflexively on the 10 and 2 position of the steering wheel, took a deep breath, and then I opened my eyes and I reached over and I grabbed the suicide note. I placed that in the center of the dash. I took the keys out of the ignition and I placed those in the center of the note. And I exited and then turned back around to make sure the door was unlocked, and then turned back the other way, crossed over the road, and then went down this narrow path that ran parallel with a busy road and came to the closest end of the bridge deck. Now, the bridge is basically a half mile long. It's 2,000 feet, and the view is spectacular. But on this day, the only thing that I looked at, not making eye contact with the drivers who were passing by, not taking in the spectacular view, all I looked at was the light post that stood right in the middle at 1,000 feet away. And little by little by little, I made my way to that midpoint, right in the middle of the bridge deck. And I turned to my left, and the suicide barrier hit me right about crossing my chest. And I didn't look up. Instead, I looked down, and I focused on the North Fork of the American River. And then I closed my eyes again, and I had done the calculation. It was going to take me 7.5 seconds to fall. And I began to think, okay, what's the most fluid way to get up and over this rail? And what's it going to feel like to drop? Then I thought, I'm not going to live, but I don't want to hurt. I don't want to feel the impact. So, dear God, please have me pass out or pass away. And this was this recurring tape over and over and over again, so fixated, and I need to emphasize that because I don't know how long I stood there. But thankfully, it was long enough for a passing driver to look upon this man, me, in this pose, realize something's not right with this picture. Pick up our phone, call 911, and a deputy sheriff from Placer County approached me from the left-hand side and did two essential things. The first thing he did was establish contact, which is logistical. But then he created connection, which is life-saving because, as previously mentioned, connection creates hope, and hope saves lives. I was taken off the bridge to an emergency department and then to what they call the puff. Now, I remember being in the ambulance when I made this from the emergency department to the psych ward. And I remember there was this big EMT and he could tell I was stressed and he put his hand right on my heart and he said, "Brother, you're going to a good place. You're going to the puff." And I'm like, what's the puff? All I can think at 48 years old, I'm thinking of Puff the Maggot Dragon. They're taking me to an opium den or something. Well, PUF stands for the Psychiatric Health Facility. Now, when people found out I was there and why, they couldn't wrap their head around it. And this is in part to the answer of what is the why of suicide. And I know because people told me is, why would David want to kill himself? Why would David forget that he's worthy? Why would David feel like he's an embarrassment, like he's a burden? Why would David want to leave this world with so much unfinished? And then why would David be so selfish? Why would David cause other people to hurt? And those are understandable questions. Those are the whys, because people didn't see me as suicidal. People didn't see me as clinically depressed. Instead, people saw me as one half of a committed couple who ran this extraordinary, amazing animal sanctuary called A Chance for Bliss. And along with my wife, Deanna, we were home to as many as 100 animals at any one time. 25 horses, 23 dogs, 9 pot-bellied pigs, goats and sheep and ducks and geese and bunnies and birds and turtles and fish. Like this whole Noah's Ark, like literally on this little 2.5 acre parcel in the beautiful little hamlet of Penryn. Now, for an animal to come to the sanctuary, they had to fit into one of 4 very specific categories. They had to be very old, they had to be very sick, they had to have some sort of special need, or the vast majority were at the end of life. These were the unadoptables. These are the ones that had no chance of being adopted. But instead, they would stay with us because we did no adoptions. As mentioned, this was their forever home. And they would stay with us until they made their transition. And in all the years of animal care and rescue, had 90 animals make their transition, but having the honor of serving them. And we became known throughout the country, even different parts of the world, as this extraordinary forever home sanctuary. And on June 2nd, 2010, we were the cover story in the life section of USA Today. I didn't fit the image of somebody who was clinically depressed. I didn't fit the image of somebody who was suicidal. It didn't make sense because the people asked the why. Why would David want to kill himself? And the initial answer to that is because the monster known as clinical depression, not so much in an audible sense, but in a dark thought sense, convinced me that yes, indeed, I was worthless, I was useless, I was a piece of crap, that I had no value, that I was grotesque and stupid and ugly, that he convinced me of this. And while you may think, well, that's just a thought, here's the problem with depression. And Chef David Chang is an extraordinary award-winning chef who's had his own battle with bipolar. And when I read this recently, I said, dear chef, this is exactly right. This is the answer initially to the why, is that when you're depressed, you become convinced that everything you think is true. Let me say it again. When you're depressed, you become convinced that everything you think is true. Now, we've all had those bizarre thoughts that come, wow, where did that come from? We've had days when we're disappointed in ourselves, when we look in the mirror and say, it's not a good day, when we're angry with ourselves, when we know that we've disappointed and made a mistake, but we can usually in time get rid of that thought. But what if every single one of those thoughts and all the other thoughts with that you become convinced, not as a possibility, but as a truth, those are true. And what happens is, in answer to the why, the painful, the awful why is, we think this is the only way. We think that what we're about to do is not selfish, that what we're about to do is selfless because the world will be better. Now, I'm not saying this is logical, but if we're trying to help people to understand depression, the first thing we need to do is to take off the coat of logic and come with the coat of compassion, because we're not dealing with things that make sense. Because here's the bottom line truth in regards to this. Sometimes what hurts the most cannot be seen. Sometimes the conversations that are most difficult, that are most daunting, that are most horrific can't be seen, because there's a lot that lies behind a forced smile, a distracting joke, or in this case, a seemingly perfect and ideal life. Who wouldn't want to run an animal sanctuary? But because I was a great actor, because I could hide behind the velocity of running an animal sanctuary, nobody knew, not even my former beloved, the precarious place of hopelessness that I found myself on that awful, awful day. And just 14 short months after the mountaintop experience of being in USA Today, there I was on a dark spot on a tall, tall bridge, one moment away from killing myself. But somehow, divinely, serendipitously, my life was saved. And on a day I thought would be my last day alive, it wasn't set the very first day of a brand new life, this amazing life. And the first steps in what has now been an almost exactly 10-year journey away from mental illness and into the experience of our birthright. Mental health is not a privilege. Mental health is a birthright. And this evening, I want to share with you some things. First, I want to share with you what it feels like, as I still have my days. I still have the occasional thought of ending my life, but they're days, they're not weeks, they're not months. And I want to share with you what I've learned about what this thing isn't and about what it is, and then share with you, what do I do to stay well? And then share with you, how do we do this thing called connection? So the first thing, what does it feel like? It is awful beyond belief. I don't have really the words, but so I need to tell you a story. And I'm going to tell you a story about one of the dogs that came to the sanctuary. Winston was a Boston Terrier. Now, if you don't know what a Boston Terrier is, let me paint a picture. One, they're like the perfect couple size. They're right about 20 pounds. And imagine like a bulldog, but make it smaller. But keep the smushy face and the cute little butt and like the cannonball features. And right about 20 pounds is mentioned. And you put it in a black and white tuxedo. They're called the American Gentleman. You can make a Boston at home. It's very easy. Just take equal parts enthusiasm and gas. Put them together. Bam, there you go. So if a Boston came to be where each of you are, they would be annoyingly happy. They are the epitome of enthusiasm. Life is great. There's nothing to worry about. Head up, ears up, just ready to take charge. But when Winnie came to the sanctuary, he didn't have any of it. My former beloved took thousands of pictures, and this picture was on the first day that Winston came to the sanctuary. Ear down, emaciated. I thought he was dead. When the rescuer put him in our arms, he was skinny and scarred and beaten and bruised. And I put him on the ground, and his head hung so low that his chin dragged on the carpet. And he was the opposite of what he was created to be, of what he had the right to be. And the reason is, Winston had suffered the horror of being used as a bait dog in a dog fighting. This 20-pound innocent soul put in and amongst of fighting dogs, vicious, awful dogs, whose sole purpose was to practice mauling other dogs. And they directed all this on my beloved puppy. I call all dogs puppy no matter what their ages are. And you can imagine being bitten at and torn at and attacked and violated day after day after day after day. And it's an awful image, and I use it on purpose. Because for people like me, people in your community who have suffered from this is what it feels like to be depressed. This is what it feels like to have the monster annihilate you each and every day. And what happens is you go into a place of hopelessness. And I, for one, don't think people don't die from mental illness. They die from hopelessness. And I was in that place when I went into the psych ward, and in the least likely of place, my life changed. Second day, I sat down with the psychiatrist, and they told me, well, the doctor's going to come in, but the guy didn't have a lab coat or a stethoscope. I didn't think he was a doctor. And he introduced himself. Okay. And he just had this kind of comfort and ease. And we actually didn't start talking about medical stuff. He just started talking about life. And he found out about the animal sanctuary. He says, oh my God, I love dogs. And we got into this thing. He created connection in this amazing way. And then at one point he had to pivot. And he had to ask some questions, and he asked two no one had ever asked me. The first said, David, is there any history of mental illness in your family? And I said, well, you know what? I never met him, but my father's father, my paternal grandfather, ended his life by suicide when my dad was young. And while I lost my father when I was very young, my three older brothers told me that our dad was horrifically depressed, oftentimes suicidal. And he said, well, David, realize you can inherit a gene for mental illness. It's not unusual, but because it's a medical condition, telling me what it is, it's a medical condition. Just because it's like diabetes and heart disease, these other things, just because you have a predisposition, doesn't mean you're going to suffer from it. He said, oftentimes, almost always with mental illness, there needs to be a match to light that dry kindling of predisposition. He said, unfortunately, oftentimes the match is trauma. And then he shifted in his chair in this way where he took his listening to a whole nother level. And I love the definition of compassion that calls it curiosity without assumption. He had asked these questions before, but I didn't feel like he had. And he looked at me and he said, David, have you suffered any trauma? Now my mind went blank. And he picked up on these nonverbal clues and he said, well, you said you were young when your father died. How old? And I said, I was just 7. And he said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That's traumatic. That impacts a person for the rest of their life. And then he said, has there been anything else? And there was something else, something so horrible I didn't feel safe to share it, but there was something about the space that this man created in that place that it gave me this permission, albeit want, to unburden my soul. And I looked at him and I said, Doctor, when I was just 11 years old, I was brutally sodomized and violated and raped on 2 occasions by a Boy Scout leader. And then there was this almost like a sacred silence. And then this extraordinary man, he leaned forward and he took me by my hands and he looked at me and he said, David, dear David, this is not your choice. You didn't choose your genetics and you didn't choose your trauma. This is not your choice. But then he looked at me and he said 4 words which reminded me what mental illness is not, when he said, it's not your fault. Now, this is so contrary to what I believe that I couldn't process. It was like I could see his mouth moving, but there were no words. And so he just picked up on this nonverbal clue, held my hands just a little bit tighter and said, it's not your fault. And I think about this experience and the way this man treated me, it was really the epitome of empathy. And, you know, we men will go and say, I'm feeling you, bro. And it's not about that. I think that empathy is best described when you say, I'm feeling with you. And shame can't survive empathy. Empathy just with shame, shame's butt. Shame goes right away. And just that's what the power of this is. And over the next 15 days, I began to learn, like, okay, we know what it's not. It's not our fault. It's not our choice. And here's what it is. It's this thing that impacts your body, your mind, and your spirit. And people oftentimes think, okay, well, you have depression, then the opposite must be happiness. But no. The great Andrew Solomon in all of his TED Talks reminds us this, that the opposite of depression is not happiness, it's vitality. It's not the will to live. People like me don't lose the will to live, they lose the want to live. And there is a huge difference. We lose the want to live. And so when we get to the other side of depression, we have this vitality. We want to live. And then for the duration, this whole thing that got into my mind was it's all about self-care. Because the monster impacts the whole of who we are, the only way that I can be well is to put my self-care, body, mind, and spirit high on a pedestal. And I've been blessed with extraordinary people to come into my life and to teach me what it takes. And it's all about sleep and diet and exercise and time outside. It's all about counseling and psychiatry and therapy and peer support. And I have this amazing, my psychiatrist has become like a dad to me. Like, who gets that gift? And then I have my own spiritual ritual, and this is my purpose. The sanctuary doesn't exist anymore. But I get to use stories from the sanctuary to wrap mental health in animal tales and to try to make a difference. But here's the other part that I've learned most recently that's an aspect of self-care that may surprise you. The other pandemic that's coming that we don't talk a lot about is this whole thing called grief. Your amazing community has suffered way too many losses. And grief, if we don't process it, is going to cause a problem. And as you can see from Gina Moffitt's, as the dust settles and we begin to move forward in a new way, grief will become a large part of the mental health burdens people are carrying. Part of the issue is people put loss and grief in the same package. They're two entirely different things. Loss is the experience. Grief is the normal response to the loss. Grief is not our friend, not the enemy. Grief is actually our friend. But let's expand this thing as it relates to this aspect of depression. Now, if I have to pick any TED Talk, and I have a link to this as a resource, it's Johann Hari's great talk, Everything We Know About Addiction is Wrong. And what Johann says is the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And he does this great comment about, isn't depression in all its form really a form of grief because our life is not the way we wanted it to be? And of course, he says it more beautifully. So this grief and this aspect of depression are hand in hand, and we must be able to process it because, of course, with COVID-19, and in particular around your community, with the focus on service-based businesses and restaurants and skiing and everything else, COVID just annihilated, took away all these things that were not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. You were descended upon by a situation you had no control over. And so we need to process our loss. And to convince you, or just to add this maybe empirical evidence that grief is a way of self-care, Dr. Remen wrote an amazing book called Kitchen Table Wisdom. Please read it. She's an extraordinary person. Here's what she says about grief, and this is what changed my whole paradigm on this. Yet people who really don't care are rarely vulnerable to burnout. Psychopaths don't burn out. There are no burned out tyrants or dictators. Only people who care can get to a place of numbness. We burn out not because we don't care, but because we don't grieve. In my experience, burnout only really begins to heal when people learn how to grieve. Grieving is a way of self-care. The reference to Antidote to Professionalism was this talk that she gave to doctors. So one of our hesitations, though, in talking about a grief is that we rank loss. We think, yeah, I lost my job, but I still have my house and their kids starving in Africa. Okay. But if we don't process our grief, it is going to morph into some sort of mental health disorder. We need to grieve. Grief is our friend, not our enemy. And we'll talk about this a little bit longer. But so this whole aspect of self-care, imagine it as a vehicle. What fuels that vehicle is connection. Three most essential words in mental health are connection, connection, connection. Dr. Travis says that the currency of wellness is connection. You go into a store and you say, hey, I want a big old bag of wellness. Well, give me some connection. We cannot be well alone. It is impossible. Yes, we need some solitude, a choice, but we don't need isolation. It's not a choice. The only way we can be well is to be connected individually and as a community. It must be. And let me put it this way. When you take I and you replace it with we, illness becomes wellness. That's it. Our communities, yours at the top of that list, can heal if we come together, if we maintain connection, just like Robin had talked about. And you have a behavioral health system that's really second to none. And Deanna and I saw the impact of connection like hundreds of times at the sanctuary. Like animals that were just in this place of despair and hopelessness came to life, including Winston. There is Winnie Roo, we called him. And like, this is the same dog. He looked like this all the time. Went from skinny and scarred and beaten and bruised to solid and strong and bold and beautiful and a freaking brat. He was just a jerk at times. But Dee used to say, you know what, babe, when they get a little jerky, it's a good thing. Here's what Mr. Man liked to do. All the dogs lived in the house. Very clean. Don't go to a bad place. So we have this dog door. Here's what Mr. Man, I would be watching him. And he would make his way out the dog door and then he'd stop. Front feet on the outside. Back end on the inside, lift his leg up, piss inside the house, then go out. You're killing me. I'm going to shrink you, but I'm going to kiss you. Connection transforms boys and things that are maybe not so grateful, but it's all about connection, 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 connection. I'm going to be like a broken record on this tonight. So question comes, all right, Baldy, how do you make connection? I'm so glad you asked. There are three principal ways, and we are going to learn this tonight. It's recognition, understanding, and expression. So let's first look at recognition, and I love this. This is the initial step. It has to start here. And if you look at the definition, why does recognition initiate connection? It's because recognition is the acknowledgement of something as valid or as entitled to consideration, like you matter. You deserve to be there. Even more importantly, you are worthy. Imagine you meet somebody. I'm going to stop that because I want to save that question for a little bit later. I had a little bit of a brain fade, but I'm okay now. So recognition. How do you recognize somebody? Well, I'm a freak about names. Great Dale Carnegie, I think, said it best, is to a person's name is to that person the sweetest, most important sound in a language. And I want you to think for just a moment. I want you to imagine a time that somebody remembered your name and you had no expectation that they would. Like you come into a room and someone says, oh my God, Robin, it is so nice to see you. And you have no expectation. You're like, wow. And isn't it interesting that for me, at least, that happens on a day that I need nothing more in life. Like all I need is somebody to recognize me, to remind me that I'm alive, to remind me that like my existence matters. What's going to happen is by the end of tonight, I'm going to teach you a method to become good with names. And there's going to be a day that you're going to remember a person's name and they have no expectation that you would. And little unbeknownst to you, that the thing that person needs in that moment is someone to just simply recognize them as worthy and deserving of consideration. Now we move to understanding. Now, I'd like each of you, and everybody's hand should be going up, not literally, but figuratively. Imagine a time that you've acted in a way that made no sense to anybody else. Like people are like, Baldy, what up? But for me, and I think it's true for everybody else, there's something going on invisibly that's driving that action. Now, we can stand in judgment, but here's understanding may be the most essential tool of all times. And in regards to this thing called mental illness, I think that the most direct path we can take to overcoming our fears, my own as well, about mental illness is to leverage the power of curiosity to create understanding. The opposite of fear is not calm. The opposite of fear is understanding. The more we understand, the less we fear. We know this to be true. When we discover the story, everything changes, and oftentimes we are quite surprised. So I'm holding a goose. That's Adia, A-D-I-A, which is Swahili for beautiful. He's an African goose. Right over my right shoulder, that's Mercy, Grace, and Dave. Dave really thought he was a goose. So we had this beautiful pond in the back pasture. And so Adia comes, I put him on the edge of the pond, but instead of going into this perfect situation, that which he was created for, that which had been created for him, Adia didn't go into the pond. He didn't go swim to be with Mercy, Grace, and Dave. He didn't do that. There was this small bathtub-sized water trough that was filled with water for the farm animals to drink of. Adia jumped in there. We may bring someone who is suffering to the edge of all the resources that we know will change, if not save their lives, but they jump into the bathtub-sized container, vessel, area, paradigm of their own suffering. Like, why would you do that? It makes no sense. I don't understand you. So I look at Adia and I'm like, well, maybe he's stressed out. Put him out of the water trough, back on the edge, jumps back in. Pull him out of the water trough, back on the edge, jumps back in. Now, for me, because I'm not very evolved, I started to move along the continuum of, oh, it's kind of curious. I don't know. Now you're getting a little annoying. Now you're pissing me off. I got things to do. And so I get revved up. I don't understand. There's nothing of value comes from misunderstanding. Deanna, thank God, she came along and looked at the situation, let me just be a man and my head spinning up, I'm losing my stuff, goes in, makes a couple calls to the rescue organizations where Adia came from, and came back and said, hey, honey, I found out something about Adia. What'd you find out, babe? I said, well, honey, I found out that Adia had lived his whole life in somebody's small backyard. I said, sweetheart, Adia's never seen a pond. Adia has only ever swum in this teeny little kiddie pool. I'm like, of course, that's what he's doing. You can't even imagine a pond. Of course, he's in a place of familiarity. People may come to the edge of counseling and come to behavioral health and they just resist. Well, they don't know. They don't feel like they're understood. And I sat down and just like, whoa, man, that's got some knowledge dropped on me. And then in that instant, I thought, wait a second, whoa, I can just get a second water trough. But why can't I come up with that solution when I misunderstand somebody? But why can't I come up with the solution when I do understand? So there I am sitting, Adia swimming around the water trough, Mercy, Grace, Dave doing their thing. I'm like, woo, 5 minutes passes by. Adia jumps up out of the water trough, walks around me and sits down right next to me on the right-hand side. And I was just waiting for him to put his wings and hold me, like rub my bald head. There, it's gonna be okay. 5 minutes after that, my beautiful new goose stood up, went to the edge of the pond, looked out at Mercy, Grace, and Dave. Water trough. Me, eyes back, swam into the pond. When people are connected, they are able to take advantage of resources and everything else that is in their best interest. That's just the way that they can do it. But when they feel disconnected, they won't. They just won't do it. And so the other part of feeling understood is that you create this energetic vortex in which people can take advantage of the things that are in their best interest. So curiosity leads to understanding, but when it comes to mental illness, we need to ask some tough questions. The first question out of the mouth of the first responder who pulled me off the bridge was totally counterintuitive. And he asked me, he said, David, what does it feel like to be depressed? Now, why would you ask that question? Why would you think that that would be something that would keep somebody on the safe side of the rail? But that's the sort of question. And then he followed it up with another question. He said, David, how long have you lived with this situation? And then he said, David, what's it like on your worst days? Like, you would never think to ask that question. That question is totally counterintuitive. But then what the man did was even more extraordinary, is he listened. He didn't start to respond for me, he just listened. And the same great Dr. Remen says is that our listening creates a sanctuary from the homeless parts in other people. I had a place to live on that particular day, but on that bridge, on that tall, dark spot, on that tall structure, I was homeless. I was spiritually homeless. I was emotionally homeless. This man created this place for me. And then he shifted on what I like to say, a mustard seed, but not a full mustard seed, only a half a mustard seed, not of faith, but of hope. And he said, David, what's it like on your best days? And then the question then had me finally look up and take in the view. He says, David, what do you want the rest of your life to look like? And I looked up, and it's like I'd never seen that view before. And I had like a little mist, because it was warm that day. I felt like this little mist of hope came down on me. And I turned to my left and I retraced my steps. And here was the exclamation point. We're walking off, and what the middle-aged officer to the middle-aged man, what he didn't say was, hey man, way to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, way to be a real man. He didn't say that. He turns to me and says, thank you for telling me how you feel. Recognition, understanding, and now to go to expression. Now, William James is considered to be the doctor of American psychology, and he says that the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated, to be acknowledged. People need of what I call an experience of matter, especially now. Life is just whipping our butts. Not because we did anything wrong, but these conditions are overwhelming. We gotta let people know how we feel. We can send an email, we can do a text, we can do lots of different things. We can do it in person, but I think that the most powerful thing is the good old-fashioned handwritten note. And we know this because we've been on the receiving end of these, and we know they're these priceless gems. And because again, I still have these days. Not long ago, a young woman who's like a daughter to me, Natalie, knew that sometimes what hurts David the most can't be seen, but sometimes what helps David the most is easy to do. And so she wrote me this note: David, I love you so much more than I could possibly ever show you. I truly can't imagine our family without you. I lately have felt sad because I don't know what I can do to help you. I don't understand depression, and I don't feel like anyone really does. I have been researching to try to figure out what I can do to help. However, I haven't really found anything, so I thought I would just reach out and remind you that even though your depression may cause you to feel that you are not worthy, that is the absolute farthest thing from the truth. You could give me $1 million, I wouldn't give you this car. And every time I read it, I realize this is the perfect note, because Natalie offers me support, not advice. It oozes empathy, not judgment. It's extraordinary. And then with just 7 short words, 7 amazing words, Natalie pulls me from the cold place of isolation into the perfect warm place of inclusion by telling me with no uncertain terms that depression can't have you because you're ours. It's all about connection. And let me share with you additional experience. I got out of the psychiatric ward on September 15th of 2011. By the end of that year, by December 31st, I lost everything. When I got out, because people didn't understand mental illness, because people didn't understand suicide, because people didn't understand any of that, we lost all our support. I remember handing the keys to my vehicle and watching the repo man drive away. People lost confidence of us, and so the animals were taken to other sanctuaries. We lost our home to foreclosure, and it was sold at auction, and marriage to this beautiful woman ended. I had nothing left. When I was in the psych hospital, I met a guy named Don. Don and I became buddies. When Don got out, he found this incredible men's depression support group, and for the next 6 years, every Tuesday, I spent 2 hours with these middle-aged men supporting one another. From that group, I met my current therapist. From that group, I met my current psychiatrist. From that group, I got on the right medication. From that group, 9 years ago, I was given the first opportunity to tell my story by a dear friend named Will Taylor. I share this because had I not had those connections right when I got out and continued, come December 31st of 2011, there's no way I would have been alive, because in reality, things got worse when I got out of the psych ward before I went in. Connection saved my life then. Connection continues to save my life now. And here at the end of this first part, here's the reality that we're facing right now. And these are in the words of this great, incredible psychiatrist, Dr. Drew Ramsey. These are his words, not mine. Someone you see today is thinking about killing themselves. Your smile, your question, your love could save them. Trust me, they told me it did. connection saves people's lives. And in that place, when you feel a little bit better, we saw the picture of Winston. I'm going to add this picture. This is Buddy. And I love this picture because it's all going to be okay. We're at peace. We know that we matter. We know that we're going to be provided for. We know that tomorrow is going to be at least a little bit better today and the day after. And that's what your community, we can all do together, because the reality is that connection creates hope, and hope saves lives. So at this point, this is the end. That's the end of my story part of it. So I'm going to come back over here, my computer to work, and just see, Robin, are there any, let's see. So in this part, if there's any specific questions now, if not, I'm just going to go into the teaching part, which really it's going to drill down these ways to create connection, so that here in the next, by 7 o'clock, you're going to be masters at the art of connection. So if there's nothing right now, I'm going to go ahead and move on to this. Now, the other thing to let you know is you're going to get copies of everything that I have here tonight. I'm going to give a PDF to my dear friend Cassandra, and then I'm also going to give Cassandra my cell phone number and my email, so please call me. If there's anything I can do to support you, like, please, literally, I'm not just making it up, please call me. So let's first look at this a little bit more about the awful why, the why of suicide. I had shared before that I think that the answer to, what do I want to say here? I'm getting tongue-tied. It's, again, when you're depressed, you become convinced that everything you think is true. It's not logical. But the person like me who is standing on the edge, or a gun to their head, or a noose around their neck, or a bottle of pills, whatever it is, they're convinced that everything's going to be better, not just for themselves, more importantly for the people who they leave, that they're considering their act to be selfless, not selfish. That's the most common. Now, here are some other whys. You say, tell me why. Why would they want to commit suicide? And these are some of the common reasons, that they become isolated and disconnected. COVID, unfortunately, has created the ideal situations, that there are these incessant dark thoughts. They're suffering from chronic pain and illness. They have actual loss or the fear of loss. And in your community, I can only imagine there's PTSD with the amount of loss that you've had. I am so sorry that you've had to experience all that. I cannot imagine how devastating that is. There can be traumatic stress. There can be substance use. There can be mental illness. Not everybody who ends their life by suicide is technically mentally ill. But ultimately, as mentioned, I think hopelessness is the real, probably the most prevalent answer to the why. Just lost hope. And without hope, nothing. You know, we go to a wedding and we hear of faith, hope, and love. Love is the greatest. I'm like, I disagree. Love is fickle. It plays hide and seek. Faith is like intimidating, like a rock star. Charles Schultz, the creator of Peanuts, said that happiness is like a warm puppy. You know what? I agree. But I think hope is like a whole litter of 8-week-old Boston Terrier, Labrador Retrievers, Golden Retrievers, St. Bernards, whatever it is. This hope just wants to be with you. Hope just wants to love you and kiss you. I always imagine that first responder, when he asked that last question about what do you want the rest of your life to be like, in that moment he put down this invisible puppy. And that puppy jumped on the back of my legs, and I turned around, and it was hope, and just wanted me to hold them. So now let's look quickly what to look for. And let me preface this by saying all of these signs are unbelievably subtle. It is so easy to miss because oftentimes people like me are great actors. Cognitive ability decreases, isolation, loss of morale, emotional intensity. People act angry, but realize anger is a secondary emotion. It's not a primary emotion. We become angry mostly because we want things to be different and we don't know how to create anything different. All these other things, but let me underscore, because oftentimes there is this guilt when somebody close to you that you know, when they end their life, that we should have seen the signs, but the signs are really, really subtle. And so part of the difficulty, what fuels the monster's ability to kill people, and what perpetuates us in communities of all type, is this awful thing called stigma. Now, in a small community like yours, I can imagine the reality is that things get around really quickly. Barbara has a problem. Oh my gosh, did you hear what happened to Barbara? Did you hear what happened to Fred? And even with good intentions, things can be misinterpreted. People can misunderstand what's going around it. And what has then, when you hear about somebody else's malady that really you had no business of knowing, heaven forbid if you're going to say the same thing. So stigma keeps our mouth shut. And if you look at how powerful stigma is as a killing machine, here are 3 different definitions. And I've read these so many times, but they're so powerful. This defined as a sign of disgrace, almost like a scarlet letter, which sets a person apart. The process by which reaction of others spoils normal identity. You feel like you're, not only you're disconnected, like you're an anomaly, almost like you're a freak. That's the power of stigma. But when we understand one another, when we use curiosity to understand a person's story, stigma can't go. The other thing is, if we together as a community can move mental illness from a condition to a cause, game over. Breast cancer is a cause. Stigma can't attach itself to a cause. Diabetes is a cause. Heart disease is a cause. Mental illness and suicide need to become causes, so stigma can't attach itself to it. But ultimately, even after we go through all these things in regards to how to create connection, it is incredibly simple. Oftentimes, it's just proximity. And so let me tell you another story. This goat is not dead. This is a fainting goat. If you don't know what a fainting goat, just go on Google, it'll make you laugh. What happens is a fainting goat, when they get startled, when they get triggered, they become instantly stiff and fall over like they're dead. And some people call them Tennessee wood-legging goats or myotonic goats. They just, boom, they go down. So people would come to the sanctuary and say, could you please make the goat faint? No, I'm not gonna make the goat faint. It's cruel. Sometimes I did, not very often. But just in the course of normal day life, sometimes the goats would get triggered, they get spooked, and down they go. Here was the amazing thing. Every time the goats would get triggered and faint, they became incapacitated. Literally, they couldn't move for about a minute. What was fascinating was to watch the response from the other animals. 4 or 5 of them, as soon as they saw this, they would just slowly go over, and then they would encircle the goats. They didn't rush in. They didn't nuzzle them. They didn't do anything. They like created this space, this circle. Nothing's going to happen to you. And then in about a minute or so, the 2 goats would regain their senses and come back up, and then the animals will disperse. I love the story because people like me can get triggered and get into the pace of being incapacitated, and it can freak other people out. But what if we knew that really all we need to do by the matter of creating connection is to just create a safe place for people to come back to the point, to become connected, to move into the place of accepting services at the hands of people like Cassandra and like Robin and all the people in behavioral health. That's how simple it is. Now, I talk about connection, but let's put it, how do you define it? And the great Brene Brown, if you haven't seen her TED Talk, please watch it. The great Dr. Brown says it this way, and this is the best definition I've ever seen, that I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. They're fed, they're brought alive. Like, amen, Dr. Brown, you show off. That's it. That's why connection saves lives, because it creates hope. Nothing more important in the world than hope. When people have hope, everything is possible. Without it, nothing's possible. So let's go back to these 3 ways: recognition, understanding, and expression. So another thing, we all know our name is essential. It's important, but we adults will say, I suck at names. No, you don't. We become lazy. We just haven't learned a way. It's not become important to us, but we know how it feels when someone remembers our name. And so here's a technique. There's lots of different ones. This is mine. PARA. First thing, don't be afraid to ask your name. First thing you got to do, pause, slow down, stop. Life is busy. You're never going to remember somebody's name if you don't slow down. And then ask, like, how do you spell your name? Like with Robin, you could spell it R-O-B-I-N. You could spell it R-O-B-Y-N. I'm sure there's some other things. And then what's the origin? Do you have a nickname? I'll ask people, do you like your name? Now that may seem like a flippant question, but 1 out of every 10 people say, you know what, I don't like my name. And I'll say, what would you like to be called? Like, bam, they know what they'd like to be called. And then you repeat it just to make sure that you have, especially a unique name. I asked Cassandra today, am I saying Cassandra or Cassandra? And she was very kind. You could say it either way. Okay, but I don't want to be an idiot. I don't want to be disrespectful. And just make sure you have all that and then create an association. Like somehow create something here. But here's the best way to do it, I think. And you have so much fun with this because the truth is for 99.9% of the people, there's a story behind the name. Most all of us here have a story behind the name, and I've heard some amazing stories. So in the ask part, when I'm wanting to remember somebody's name, I will ask them, what is the story behind your name? And I've heard so many. Here's the best one. So I was in Boston before COVID giving a speech, and I was in the room and everything was getting set up and there were chairs set up, hello. And there was a person, a young woman sitting in the front row. And I came up to her because nobody sits in the front row. And I said, oh my God, thank you for sitting in the front row. What's your name? And she said, my name is Hope. I'm like, hold the phone here. Like, wow, I love your name. And I said, what's the story behind your name? And she says, I don't know. I'm like, really? You don't know why your parents named you Hope? She said, I don't know. I love your name. So finished my speech. And I was in one of the breakout rooms, and then I went to go see what they call one of the spotlight speakers, and it was the great Brian Stevenson. Another TED Talk, please watch it. There are like 30,000 people waiting to hear this extraordinary human being. And so I'm waiting on the side because there's going to be this seat opening up, and I'm totally focused. And all of a sudden, somebody taps me on the shoulder. I spin around. It's Hope. And I'm like, how in the world did you find me here? And what's going on? She says, oh my God, I can't believe I found you. I'm so excited. And she thrust her phone to show me the text that she had sent her mom. She said, Mom, why did you and Dad name me Hope? And her mom wrote back and said, because your father and I knew that's what you would bring to the world. And I wish I could have been with Hope the next time she introduced herself to somebody new. Like she knew what's the story behind your name? Just please become great with names. It will change people. It will impact people in the way that it's hard to even describe. So we continue on in this whole theme about not knowing what we see. We've got to remember our ABCs. But in this case, it's the reality that assumption blocks connection. And look at the literal definition of assumption, that assumption is a thing that is accepted as true as certain without proof, no data. We see something, and if you're anything like me, we make up stories. And I think part of it is like space abhors a vacuum. Our minds are the same. Like, I can't handle that empty space. And so we got to leverage curiosity. Thomas Berger wrote a book called Little Big Man, and in the book, says that the art and science of asking questions are the source of all knowledge. Kids know this. They have no hesitation of asking questions. That officer on the bridge knew that. He had no hesitation asking these counterintuitive questions. And interesting, he never asked a why question. They were what and how, not why and when. Fascinating. And so, but what we can discover is extraordinary. And the great Mr. Rogers says it like this, is that frankly, there's no one you can't learn to love once you know their story. Story is greater than impression. We have a certain amount of time to make a first impression. Forget that. Tell me your story. And we need to give people now more than ever the space to tell their story because people are hurting. The great Lady Bird Johnson says it best, I think, when she said, people must be given the opportunity to hurt out loud. Dr. Remen says, I suspect that the most basic and powerful way to connect with another person is to listen. And then there's this thing like the psychiatrist that a loving silence often has far more power to heal and connect than the most well-intentioned words. Sometimes I got to remind myself to just shut up and listen. And again, be surprised at what you'll find out. Old man walks into the Auburn Animal Shelter and tells the staff, hey, I found this old dog for you. The man was about 80 years old. The dog was obviously 13, 14, 15 years old, and said, I found him as a stray. I thought he might need a home. And so the staff was like, wow, thank you so much. would you please fill out some information about you and where you found him, and we'll take him in back. Who knows, maybe he's microchipped. Old man fills out the information. Staff comes back and says, we are in luck, he's microchipped. And then the staff member compared the information from the microchip to what the man had, and it matched. Now, if it was me, I would have lost my mind. I said, oh man, what if someone just tossed you aside here in your old years where you had outlived your noose was? How could you be so mean? But this staff member didn't do that. She made this incredible, slight yet all important transition from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And she looked curiosity without assumption. She was compassionate. She said, sir, what's going on? What's happening? How can I help you? At that moment, the man just bursts into tears and says, this is Joshua. I've had Joshua since he was 8 weeks old. There is nothing more important in the world to me than my dog, but I'm dying. And I'm going into a facility and I can't take my dog. And I thought if I said he was a stray, instead of the fact that I had to surrender him, give him up, it would give him more time to find a home. We'd all do the same thing. And in the moment of understanding, the staff member thinks there's this sanctuary down the hill that takes in old dogs. And she called us. And I'll never forget this exchange. Man to man, being to being. And he said, please take care of my dog. And I said, I promise I will, sir. You just don't know what you're going to find out until you ask. Now let's go to this thing that we got to let people know how we feel. Dear God, we need to do right now. A quote by Dr. James, this thing by William Ward that says, feeling gratitude and not expressing it is like wrapping a present and not giving it. But here's what Mark Twain talks about the reciprocity of the creation of connection. When I remember somebody's name, I hope it makes an impact on them, but I feel good. When I take the time to ask a question about somebody, I hope it makes a difference for them, but I feel good. And Mark Twain says the happy phrasing of a compliment is one of the rarest of all human gifts, and the happy delivery of another. And I think there are three important things when we want to express ourselves to people. We want to be timely, we want to be specific, and we want to be authentic. Like, let people know how you feel. Now, and again, you can send a text. I'm totally down with text. I think they're fantastic. But just be specific. Do it in an email. Do it in a phone call. But I'm going to go back to this whole thing about handwritten notes. I shared the one from Natalie, but let me tell you another story. So until about 5 years ago, no, it wasn't about, it was 5 years ago, August 31st of every year was the worst day of the year for me. One, I'm a January baby. I hate August. It's hot. It's terrible. I like the winter. I like it cold. Added to that, of course, August 31st is the day I was going to kill myself, the day that I felt like I was the biggest failure. And even as I'd made some motion towards from mental illness to mental illness, I still felt deficient, especially on that day. And so on this particular day, 5 years ago, I go to the mailbox and I'm sorting through the mail. And then I see that uniquely sized envelope. It's handwritten. And it had this return address with a woman's name. It had flowers and puppies and all kinds of stuff on it. And I was like, who is this? And I'm cranky, I'm mad, I'm all these different things. I'm angry, I really don't care. And so I rip open the package and sure enough, it's a card. So on the outside of the card, can't see it here, but it says advice from a glacier. Carve your own path, go slow, channel your strengths, smooth the way for others, blah, blah, blah. Like I wanted to just like fling it like a Frisbee. I don't need this BS positive platitudes on this day. No, I don't need this. But more out of curiosity than anything else, I was compelled to open it. And on the inside, it says, happy today. And it's from my sneaky friend, Greg, like a brother to me who suffers from the same sort of situation, who used his mother-in-law's return address so I would be caught off guard. And here's what my brother says. Hey, just a note to remind you that you are an extraordinary person with so much to give so many others. You are a tremendous source of healing just by your personal presence. This is not only my sentiment. So many others also believe in you. Believe in yourself. Reject the lies. I love you. As a result of this piece of paper showing up on that day, August 31st went from the worst day of the year to my New Year's Day. And every August 31st since, I go back to the bridge. And I park my car in the same spot, but there is no note to put on the dash, and I lock my car. And this last year was the most extraordinary of all, because my beloved, my sweetheart, the woman I will marry, whose name just happens to be Summer, she said, honey, I want to go with you. So I don't have to tell you what the contrast was like between the epitome of isolation to the epitome of connection. And I don't need to go back anymore. I'm complete with that. We can do this. I know in my heart of hearts, I'm not saying it's going to be, it's a complex problem, but the solution is easy. It's connection creates hope, hope saves lives. We can get to a different place, and I know we will. I know it. I'm not being Pollyanna. We can have all of us move from any place of wellness to any place of wellness. And when we do, on that day, on that amazing day that is coming, I'll end with this last story. Our story is going to be just like Odie's story. Now, Odie was a 35-year-old chocolate-colored, what they call a Tennessee Walker, when he came to the sanctuary. A Tennessee Walker is a gaited horse. So Odie was a proud parade pony. So all those different civic parades, Odie was that horse out in front of everybody. But when Odie, Ode, as we called him, came to the sanctuary, he was old, he was emaciated, he was sick, he was skinny, and he had this bad right-hand hip, which caused him to list to the right-hand side. But all the animals, thanks primarily to the genius, brilliant work of Deanna, as soon as their hooves hit sanctuary soil, they began this sacred transformation from hopelessness to hopefulness. Now, truth is, all horses want a job, and Odie was no exception. But we didn't have one ads, and so, but Odie assumed what we call the role of the town crier. Twice a day, morning and evening, Odie would be the first animal lined up at the gate. When the other animals saw the grand old man in front and center position, they would form ranks behind him and follow Odie from the front pasture to the rear, where they would spend the day, the pasture with the big pond. And then in the evening, they would switch and go from the rear pasture back to the front, where they have dinner and relax. Well, on this one day, there's the man. I was running a little late. He was banging the gate. I'm like, please, really? Open the gate, and there Odie goes, and he's leading his posse to the rear pasture. I come behind him, shut the gate, and then go pick up manure. I've got a PhD. If you need manure picked up, call me. So I'm doing my work, and then, like many of us have had, I have this feeling like something's not right. I spin around, and there to my horror, Odie's down on his bad right-hand hip, right on the edge of the pond. And I'm watching him, kind of assessing the situation. And then to my added horror, I watch as he tries to stand, he loses his balance, and he falls into the pond. I'm like, dear God, he's not strong enough. He's not going to be able to swim, and he's going to drown. He's going to die. And so I run back. I get up to the edge, and I come right up to the edge of the pond. And I look, and I'm like, whoa, wait a second, wait. Water's buoyant. He'll be able to regain balance. He'll be okay. But then over the next 3 hours, I watched as Odie would attempt to stand and he'd fall back. And he would attempt to stand and fall back, attempt to stand and fall back. And I'm like, oh, shit. He's not going to make it out of the pond. There's nothing I can do. Now, Deanna and I were all about the quality of an animal's experience, be that short or long. It didn't matter to us. And I realized on this horrible, horrible, horrible day that I had to make the most difficult decision of all and help Odie move from this experience to the greatest pasture ball. So I went inside crying, called our veterinarian, and we came up with this complex plan to euthanize Odie in the pond and then retrieve his body later. Well, by the time I came back, it was the evening. It was dinner time. It was the end of the day, but it wasn't Odie in the primary position to lead the posse back to the front. It wasn't him. He's in the pond, head barely above water at this point. In his position was Prince. Prince, this beautiful 30-something caramel-colored former racing horse, white on his forelock. His 4 feet looked like they had been dipped in white paint. He and Odie were the best of friends. They were always together. They were the epitome of BFF. But Prince had never been in this position. It was always Odie. But here he was, this beautiful horse, taking the position of his brother. But Prince was there hesitant. You could see he was nervous and heaving, crying so hard I could hardly see. I opened the gate, and Prince begins to move the animals to the front pasture, but he stops after just 5 steps. just 5. And he lets the other animals go by. And when Chrissy, our 3-legged goat, went past him, Prince turned around, headed back to the pasture, walked right up to the edge, planted all 4 of his feet, lowered his head, and locked eyes with intention and connection with his best friend. I'd never seen anything. I'd never seen 2 animals so sacredly connected. And so I walked up, and there we were, like 3 brothers, frozen in this triangular embrace, engaged in this sacred and this solemn goodbye. At least that's what I thought. Because 5 minutes later, my mighty horse, he stood up and he steadied himself. And he took this slow right-hand turn, and step by step by step, he made his way out the shallow end of the pond. He took a sweeping left-hand turn, and as he got near to me, he lowered his head and put it right into the center of my chest, and he moved it back and forth just like a puppy. And I lowered my forehead till it rested on his, and I cupped his head in my hands, and I felt the dampness of his coat, breathed in his scents, and I felt his magnificence, his mightiness. We stayed that way for a little bit, and then he broke apart. And he went nose to nose with Prince in that way that only horses do. And I didn't hear it literally, but I know the dialogue was Odie saying to Prince, "Thank you, brother." And Prince saying, "I will never leave your side." And then the 2 besties broke apart to make their way back to the front pasture, with Odie leaning into Prince and Prince holding Odie up. And I hadn't noticed it, that the other animals hadn't yet started to eat, but as soon as their leader, their master, their number 1 was back, then everybody ate, because all was right in the world. Now I got to tell you that my man, he didn't live for 3 more months after that extraordinary day. Odie didn't live for 3 more weeks. My beautiful Odie didn't live for 3 more days. Odie lived for 3 more years. That's the power of connection. That's what we will do. Martin Luther King reminds us that connection transforms the fatigue of despair into the buoyancy of hope. Emily Dickinson writes that hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without words and never stops at all. I might humbly add that connection creates hope, and hope saves lives. But don't take my word for it. Ask Odie. So, thank you for listening. Robin and Cassandra and Matt, we can open it up. There's got about 10 minutes left. I have a resource list of 3 different websites, 3 different books that are awesome, and then some TED Talks, and they all have live links. So I'll send it to you. I can go over them real quick, or if there are questions, Robin and Cassandra and Matt, if you want to monitor those. And at this point, I will stop talking because you're probably tired of hearing my voice.
Thank you, David. I would love to entertain questions. So if people want to put them in the Q&A or through the Facebook Live page at Mono County Behavioral Health Facebook Live, we will add those questions in. First of all, in the meantime, thank you. I think being able to stay centered in the meaning of what you're talking about in your bedroom on Zoom is an extraordinary feat, and I appreciate that very much. When I saw you be moved by your story multiple times, and I'm assuming that that's part of hope. I wonder, like, as a man particularly, who was so overtaken by depression and really convinced that you weren't worthy, what would you say to other people, but men particularly, about how to walk through that? Since there's not one answer or a way, but what would you say about that?
I mean, thank you. It's a great question. I think, you know, since the first time that I heard Chef Chang's quote, I did become more and more convinced of how amazing it is. So I think to men, just consider, if not accept, the reality that when we men are in that depressed place, the danger is we become convinced that everything we're thinking is true. So what if it wasn't? And the most difficult thing, I think, for most people, but particularly men, is to reach out. And I think oftentimes it's just to have another soul, and let's assume it's a male soul at this point, just to share our story, just to say, you know what, brother, I'm in a bad place. And I think, like Natalie's note, what people want is support, not advice. Unless I come to you and say, could you please give me support? In my deepest day, my family knows I just need support. And they'll say, what can I do? My beloved is incredible at this. My beloved Summer, I say, honey, what can I do to have you feel supported right now? So let's not try to guess. Let's just ask the person. Now, they may not answer. They may say, oh, no, I'm fine. And then you could say, I have a buddy of mine, Greg, who wrote me the note. We'll text one another and say, how are you feeling, comma, really? Like, dude, don't give me the BS. Like, just tell me, man. I'm not going to judge you. Like, I have empathy for you. And remember, shame can't survive empathy. Like, just tell me what's going on. I'm not going to haul you off to the psych ward unless I feel like you're in danger. But that's it. I think, Robin, if we can, the most simple thing we can do is just, like Lady Bird Johnson, allow people to hurt out loud and to normalize the conversation, to make this whole thing around mental illness. Let's make it a casserole disease.
Yeah.
Like, people come home from the psych ward, let's say, let's bring some baked lasagna.
A hot dish.
Exactly. Who doesn't like cobbler?
We do have a question, and you know, because I'm in the field, and I think that the privilege and the pleasure to be able to connect with people as a therapist, but also as a client, is so sacred and cool. And I just don't, I mean, I get that there's stigma. I understand it. I totally understand it. And at the same time, whoa, man, can you imagine? You get to sit in front of somebody for a period of time and talk about whatever you need to talk about, and they're trained and not just trained like in a kind of a antiseptic way, but like relationally trained to hang out and listen with you and make space. It's so cool.
Oh,
So Katie has a question. It's what is the book, the quote from quote Raman called?
Dr. Raman. So Dr. Raman wrote 2 books, just quick, small little bios. So Dr. Raman was a pediatrician for 37 years, raised in the kind of that medical, empirical, somewhat emotionally sterile way, and said, I couldn't do this. And she became this amazing healer and worked with people who were dying. And so 2 books. First is Kitchen Table Wisdom. So it's about 50 short essays. And then she wrote a follow-up book called My Grandfather's Blessings, because she talks about how her grandfather, who was an Orthodox rabbi, made such an incredible impact. And it is, I mean, I just keep rereading Dr. Raman's stuff because it's just amazing. She's extraordinary. She tells this story one night in terms of, especially to go in terms of men's resistance to talk about feelings and everything else. She was making rounds, it was late as night, and she saw this very well-known surgeon in the nursery where the babies, going around and kissing each of the babies. And then Dr. Raman, this was some years ago, Dr. Raman saw the surgeon in the elevator at one point and mentioned it to him, and he said, I didn't do that. That wasn't me. And you just imagine, like, oh no, please stand up, and I need you as a man to stand up and tell me those stories so you make it okay for me. I need you to cry so I know it's okay. I need you to tell me how great therapy and psychiatry, I need you to tell me that your meds are working. I need you to tell me that anything that's going to help me know that I have some semblance of worth. Maybe even posing the question to somebody, and I love this question, is, what would you do if you knew you were worthy? Like, just consider that for a moment. Just like, wow. Well, that would change everything, wouldn't it? Okay. What if that was a possibility?
Even for today.
Exactly. Even for this hour.
Mhm.
Like, dwell on that a little.
So we have 2 more questions, which means we're going to go over time, and they're important questions and wonderful questions. So if you're cool with
Okay.
that, I'm cool with that. Okay.
I'll stay on until midnight if you want.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Pacific Standard Time?
Yeah. You
Okay.
sure? You're silly.
Yeah, I try to be.
I
Plus,
know.
it's the evening. Okay, here we go. Number 1 would be, how do you help someone who seems that they do not want your help?
Great question. This is the question I get more than any other one. And so here's what I would say is you approach the situation, they want to help you, just say, okay, you know what? Here's the thing. I could be totally wrong, but I just get a sense you're suffering. It pains me to feel like you were suffering. And you may get a sense says, okay, what is it like on your worst days? What does it feel like? So if you know that the person suffers from depression or whatever, just say, what does it feel like? I really want to understand. And if nothing else, just hang with them. That's all you can do. I mean, there's going to be a way. And another question that I suggest people to say, okay, if somebody else, if you knew, this is to the person, if you knew somebody was suffering or that you were worried about somebody else, what would you say to them? And allow them to participate in potentially the solution. But in the absence of them not saying anything, here's the bad news in answer to that question. It is impossible to drag somebody to mental health. Can't do it.
No.
Can't do it. So unfortunately, we are still going to lose souls to suicide, but we can reduce the numbers greatly. Because while there may be some initial hesitation, if we stay present and ask the difficult questions, because it's the unasked questions that lead to tragedy, we're going to impact people. So, and what was the second question, Robin?
Okay, so this is a little bit longer, and I'll take a tiny stab at it, and then maybe you and I could do a little role play, because it is asking for some advice about how to move forward a conversation. Okay, it goes
Great.
like this. It can feel so scary to ask the first question. I recently had an encounter with someone who had reached out for help, but who was expressing anger, and it scared me. Can you walk us through asking a question to make a connection to someone who is hurting, but who is also expressing anger?
So I took an amazing 14-week grief course, and I made reference to this in the presentation. And during the course, one of the instructors said, well, realize anger is a secondary emotion. I'm like, shut up. No, it's not. I can just be angry just like that, but this is a very learned person, not me. And the more I've thought about it, like, that's exactly right. Now, I don't want to be Pollyanna. I tend to recoil in the place of somebody being really angry. But if I can just say, could you please share with me, is there something underneath your anger? Could you please tell me when you're feeling your worst, what's it feel like? Just, it's not closed-ended questions as much as it's open-ended questions. And I'm not pretending this is easy. Please, this is what I do, and it's hard for me. So I think as much as we can in regards to this question, it could be something. I think if we preface it, if we set the table, that also makes the question a little bit easier, and just say, you know what, I'm concerned. I may be totally wrong, but I feel like, and I get that you're feeling angry. Is there something underneath that? Is something bothering you? I would love to know, because could you please help me understand? And that's it.
Beautiful. So I'm going to add to that, and I want to make sure we talk about a class that we have available through Mono County Behavioral Health. So I believe 100% in that the human psyche is trying to heal. So all of our behavior, and never is it in a straight line. So it's not like, oh, wow, I'd like to manage this certain sexual trauma in my history. I think I'll just go do this thing. No, we take all these crazy ways to get to a place. But what we're looking for is to be, as you said, I call it seen, heard, and understood. We all want that. We all can relate to that. We all want that. And typically what people will do is light a fire. And this is something very on the minds of people in Mono County. People will light a fire over there with anger so that you don't see their tenderness and shame. And so I would say that one of the things, like what you're saying, is you just hang out with people. I think we can, if you're like me at all, we make this a little bit complicated, and instead of, I don't know what to say, you might even just say to the person like, wow, you've got a lot of energy. It kind of scares me, but I really don't want to leave your side. I'm kind of, I'm interested in this. I want to know you better. I want to know what's happening. And when you get really loud like that or whatever, because of me, it scares me. So can we kind of find the middle? Like, there's no right way to be connected. There's just figuring out the best way to be connected in that moment. And how you do that sometimes is just to say very, very plainly, like, what's going on, not in a judgmental way, but in a, you know, like, hey, Robin, you're getting kind of elevated there. Like, clearly you're passionate about this. And I just want to know better what's happening because I'm concerned about you, or I feel worried about you, or I love you, or I just feel disconnected from you in a way that I want to change. All of those things work in the sense that they're all real statements about making connection with people.
When there's, and I agree with you, dear soul, 1,000%. There's a great quote by a wonderful man named Parker Palmer, who you may know. So Parker Palmer says, and this is really, it's not so much what you would say to somebody, but it's just this other level of understanding of how this person is presenting. So Parker Palmer says, violence is what happens when people don't know what to do with their suffering.
Yep.
And I'm not just, and Robin said it beautifully. I think the way that Robin set that up is, you know what? It's scaring me.
Mm-hmm.
And I want, please help me understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it may take several times. But you always got to make sure you got to take care of yourself. Don't put yourself in a dangerous situation. You know, your job.
Right, of course.
There's nothing to fix. You know, I think our job, I believe we are our brothers and sisters keepers, but that doesn't mean they have to move in with us. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Let me do. So.
Mm-hmm. One more thing that we talked about at the February 2020, before we understood what was going to happen to our lives, is the 3 questions. So, and I don't know if I borrowed this or made it up, or, you know, how things are in the ether. You're around long enough, everything is somewhere. It's kind of like American movies have to be remade over and over and damn over instead of like something original. But at any rate, it's the 3 question rule. So, you know, all of it, in my opinion, especially now, all of us are very, very, very hungry to be heard and seen. And so somebody will say, well, you go, hey, how you doing? Oh man, you know, it's been a trip to get back into this circulation here. It's a little bit scary. Oh, let me tell you a story about how scared I am. You know, that there's many ways that it gets called, but if you ask a question of someone, and then they give you an answer, ask another question, and they give you an answer, ask a third question, so that your job, when you say, how are you, or what's going on, or what are you up to, or how is that party, or whatever, how come you have stitches in your head, whatever the thing is, that when they start to give you an answer, rather than answering with your own self, you say, well, tell me more about that, or whoa, really, who was the doctor, or anything that leads back into the story that they're telling you. 3 times before you get to talk about yourself. That is a practice. It sounds simple, but it's actually, I watch myself all the time. Like, I get like right to that edge and I go, oh, I want to tell you about my dogs or my story, you know, like, because I'm also hungry for connection. But if you practice the 3 question, even when somebody's super pissed off, or, you know, ranting about something that you don't agree with, or whatever the thing is, it doesn't matter. It's just like the next thing is you take a deep breath and you say, tell me more about that. That would be 1 question. I know it sounds a little hooky therapy weird, but it is, you know, you can make up your own way of saying it. Okay, so FYI, everybody, we have what's called Mental Health First Aid, and that's a 6-hour course and we're doing it twice. It's free to the public, May 26th and 27th. Again, May 26th and 27th. You can go to the Mono County Behavioral Health website. Mental Health First Aid answers a lot of these questions and will give you a sense of, I don't know if empowerment might be a little bit strong, but definitely a sense of comfort around what to do when you're in situations that might feel out of your depth and you're not quite sure what to say or do. It's a wonderful class. We're putting on 2 in May. We will put on more as we move forward. But if you're at all interested, do check it out, please.
It is, it is awesome. It is, I did that and it's phenomenal. So yeah, I would totally back Robin on that.
Wow.
Along with everything else Robin says.
We've never even met each other yet. Okay, if there's anything else you want to say, put it in the Q&A. We'll give you a minute. And then if you're ready to move on with your evening, we totally understand. Again, this has been uploaded and it is recorded on Facebook Live through the Mono County Behavioral Health, so many syllables, Facebook page. We'll be there. I want to thank again the different people who have been involved in this, who got this moving, who encouraged us to do something around suicide and hope, as from a couple weeks ago, got us involved. Cassandra and Amanda from my department, especially, to our interpreters today, to the people who are making sure that this is available to people who speak Spanish. Thank you. And David, to you. Your vulnerability helps me have courage, and I appreciate that of you very, very much.
Thank you, Robin. What a blessing to be. And I'll just quick, this will all come to you again. These are resources, 3 national resources, 3 books that I think are really, really good, and some TED Talks. And what an honor to be with all of you tonight and to have this. Thank you for every time I tell my story, because I still struggle, it sheds off one aspect, one scale of shame that still clings to me. So thank you so much.
And the beauty of the story that you tell and the way you tell it is that you're an expression of courage, and the bravery and vulnerability of that helps me and others feel courageous. So thank you for indeed. And we'll have you here at some point in person. It would be great to have you here.
Take me out of the computer, I beg of you.
Yeah. And I have dogs that you might be able to rehabilitate. You never know.
I just hug them. I hug them. My 5-month-old Boston Terrier, Heaven, is asleep right now. But you probably heard bells at one point. There's a little terrorist.
Yeah, it's a great place for dogs. There's many here, and we would love to have you in person. So we'll work on that. And to all of you out there who are listening and who participated and who had anything to do with this, really thank you so much. This is the kind of thing that is all about Mono County and keeping us strong. So thank you. Blessings to you, man.
Thank you, man. Thanks, Robin. We'll talk to you and we'll set up a debrief.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Good night, Matt. Good night, Cassandra. Good night, Sarah. Good night, Amanda. Good night, Robin.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye.
Bye.